Hello there. Welcome to today's live stream. I'm so glad you're here because we're diving into something that I believe has the power to change how we see each other and the world around us. Let me start with a question. What if your neighbor isn't just a person living next door? What if neighbor means something so much deeper than we've ever considered? It's easy to think of neighbors as the people we share a street or apartment building with. But today, we're going to uncover how the Bible defines this idea. Spoiler alert, a lot bigger than geography. You see, the Bible talks a lot about neighbors. But let's be honest, how often do we stop and really think about what that means? Who is my neighbor? Is it just my little neighbor? The people I already know? Or does it mean everyone? And if it does, how do we love people we don't even know or might not even like? We're going to explore that today. We'll look at some key Bible passages, break down a few misconceptions, and figure out what loving our neighbors really looks like in today's world. And let's be real, loving your neighbor isn't always easy, is it? Especially when we're surrounded by people who might have different beliefs, values, or lifestyles. But I believe this teaching is more important now than ever. So grab a coffee, get comfortable, and let's dive in. And while you're here, I'd love for you to share your thoughts in the chat. Tell me, who do you think your neighbor is? Why does it matter to love your neighbor matter? Let's start by talking about why this idea of a neighbor matters so much. Why does the Bible spend so much time emphasizing it? Here's the thing. We live in a world that feels increasingly divided. Whether it's politics, culture, or just the pace of life, we've created these invisible walls between us. Think about it. When was the last time you had a real conversation with someone who sees the world differently than you do? Or reached out to someone who might be struggling? It's easy to stay in our comfort zones, isn't it? To surround ourselves with people who think like us, live like us, and believe like us. But the Bible challenges us to go beyond that. And here's why. Loving your neighbor isn't just about being nice or following a rule. It's about reflecting God's love to a world that desperately needs it. Now, let me ask you, how would the world look if we all lived this way? Can you imagine the impact? I want you to hold on to that and keep going. What does the Bible say about neighbors? All right, let's get into scripture. One of the clearest commands about neighbors comes from Leviticus 19, verse 18, where God says, "Love your neighbor as yourself." That's pretty straightforward, isn't it? Treat others the way you want to be treated. But here's what's fascinating. Jesus picks up this command in the New Testament and expands on it that are truly radical. Let's look at Matthew 20:36-40. A man, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus replies, "Love with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the love your neighbor as yourself." Did you catch that? Jesus puts loving your neighbor right next to loving God. It means that ours is directly tied to our relationship with God. But Jesus doesn't stop there. In Luke 10, he shares the parable of the Good Samaritan. And I want to spend some time here because this story is so powerful. If you're familiar with this story, you know it starts with a man who was beaten, robbed, and left for dead on the side of the road. A priest comes by, a man of God, but he walks right past. Then a Levite, another religious leader, does the same. Finally, a Samaritan comes along. Now, in Jesus' time, Samaritans were considered outsiders, even enemies. But this Samaritan is the one who stops. He tends to the man's wounds, puts him on his donkey, and takes him to an inn where he pays for his care. Jesus then asks, "Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The answer? The one who showed mercy. And that's the point. Your neighbor isn't about proximity or similarity. It's about compassion and action. Let's pause here for a moment. Think about your life. Who might be the neighbor you've been walking past? Is there someone in your life who needs your compassion, even if it's inconvenient? Feel free to share your thoughts in the chat. I'd love to hear from you. Let's bring this idea into the 21st century. What does loving your neighbor look like today? First, it means stepping out of our comfort zones. It's easy to love the people who are like us. But what about the coworker who annoys us? Or the family member who always has a different opinion? Or the stranger we pass on the street? Here's an example. Think about the person at the grocery store who's in a hurry and cuts in front of you. What's your first reaction? Frustration, right? But what if, instead, you pause and thought, I don't know what they're going through. Maybe they're having a rough day. That simple shift in perspective is an act of love. Now, I want to share a personal. Insert a heartfelt anecdote about showing kindness to someone or being inspired by someone else's love in action. Make it relatable and honest. What are the practical steps to loving your neighbor? Okay, let's get practical. Loving your neighbor might feel overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. Here are a few small steps you can take. Be intentional about connection. Start a conversation with someone you don't know well. Offer help. If you see someone struggling, whether it's carrying groceries or dealing with a tough situation, step in. Practice patience and empathy. The next time someone frustrates you, take a deep breath and try to see things from their perspective. Pray for others. This is such a simple but powerful way to show love. Which of these could you start doing this week? So, here's what we've learned. Loving your neighbor is radical. It's not about convenience or similarity. It's about seeing others the way God sees them. I want to challenge you this week. Take one step to show love to someone you wouldn't normally think of as your neighbor. And then come back and share your story. I'd love to hear how it goes. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And be sure to check out my other videos for more conversations like this one. Remember, loving your neighbor isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. Thanks for spending this time with me, and I'll see you next time.